Right, it's me again, folks. Well, my last talk for VegFest this year butts really well with what Tim has just said, in the sense that there is this conference coming up at the London VegFest in October, I think. And so there, as now, I'm kind of going not as a teacher or a lecturer or whatever, but as a student of this phenomena. But the reason that I'm talking about it now is that we kind of try to introduce it, or we have introduced it, in Ireland, in Dublin, through the work of the group that I volunteer for, the Vegan Information Project. And for a short time, in fact, we changed the name to the Vegan Intersectionality Project. And it's interesting because we got a lot of pushback for that. It's an interesting phenomena. And the truth is, there's a lot of people in the animal movement who just don't like humans. And so, and so when you try to involve a intersectional approach, you often get accused of putting your humans first or forgetting the other animals whatsoever, which is totally false. That's not what it's about. You know, it's much more nuanced than that. It's, you know, much more subtle than that. And yet you often get at that. And we got a plea to stop using the name. And so we decided that we would debate it. And then a couple of people who were kind of central to the group, they had different projects. Like one got a job. And then she couldn't really work much. And then another person went on to other things in another justice kind of context, if you like, remaining vegan, of course. And so it kind of left in abeyance, and that's kind of where it was and where it is kind of now. And so I just wanted to kind of explain a little bit about what we kind of try to do. And really, I don't know, for want of a better word, this is like almost like a teaser, but for myself, for London. You know, Sebastian's going to be there, and I want to learn about intersectionality, because it seems to me that there is that kind of joining the dots kind of thing, but it's more than that as well. You know, but our job as animal advocates is to get the concept of justice over the species barrier, in the same way as Tom Reagan got the concept of rights over the species barrier fairly successfully, especially in the mid to late 80s, when the animal rights movement, especially in North America, was almost generally rights-based for a while. And then it all became marginalized. But, you know, I don't want that necessarily to happen to this. I've got a kind of academic reason for why I was attracted to intersectionality, because I used to teach quite a few foundational courses for people who were going on to university. I used to do summer courses, this kind of thing. And so these are basic sociology courses. And one of them was teaching about feminism. And often my students were Japanese and Chinese. Chinese men in particular had a problem with feminism quite often, which was quite interesting. Not to generalize too much, but that was quite good. Often the women used to really latch onto it and think, wow, this is really good. And the men were threatened by it. But when we used to talk about types of feminism, for want of a better word, we used to talk about liberal feminists, radical feminists, Marxist feminists, and then black feminists who started to object to the way that the white feminists were theorizing about feminism. And so if we took an issue like being black and being in poverty, and also obviously being female, then the issue is that these are not three types of discrimination which add up. It's not as though they, I think, might be an AFCO, I think, says you don't layer them on top of each other. It's not that it's kind of black plus poverty plus woman equals. It's times, because they amplify each other. They amplify each other. And so it's being black plus being poor plus being a woman that is a problem, you know. So we used to teach it like that, and so I was immediately kind of thrown into that kind of way of seeing the overlapping kind of intersecting kind of things. And I was also familiar with a few other things in the sense that ecofeminists would talk about the logic of domination. In particular, I mean, that goes back to 1975, the notion that feminists should have an ecological outlook in order for them to truly understand women's oppression. The entanglements of oppression and liberation, anybody know where that comes from? That's the work of David Nybert. He's got a really good book. Recommend this book. It's called Animal Rights, Human Rights. No comma. And then it's Entanglements of Oppression and Liberation. It's a very, very good book. He argued against capitalism. He says that we can't get animal rights, animal liberation within the capitalist system. It just won't work. Alliance politics. Anybody know who that's kind of associated with? So if you think about Steve Best. Anybody know Steve Best? Okay, well, Steve Best talks about alliance politics. Now, that's an interesting idea, and it's similar to this, but he's really talking about several different social movements working together in order to kind of combine their strengths and their efforts, because they can see that, this oppression is kind of interlinked and overlapping. And entwined is another phrase that is used. And the last one, we are each other, is an anarchist thing, which was put together by somebody who was in the VIP in Dublin called Tina Cubley. They've got a new name now, but the one that they're known for in relation to this is Tina Cubley. And they are a feminist, anarchist, anti-capitalist, straight-edge vegan. And rather than thinking about alliance politics, which is almost like getting all these people in their individual boxes to join together in alliance, but remaining in their boxes, their argument was, no, actually, we should become each other. So it's not as though, as they explained it, I don't have to, as a vegan, adopt a feminist outlook, because I am a feminist. I am a feminist and I am a vegan. I am anti-racist and I am, so you don't necessarily just have to make alliances with others, as it were. You become each other. So that's a kind of very kind of strong kind of aspect to it. Okay, so this is from the first intersectionality leaflet that we produced. I don't have the leaflet. In fact, it was quite difficult to put this together because I'd forgotten that when I came from Dublin yesterday, I'd forgotten that my keyboard doesn't work. And there was one presentation that I hadn't quite finished, which was this one. And so I was going to do all kinds of things. Couldn't get online very well, but also there's several letters of the keyboard that didn't work. And so today, for about 2 hours, I've been putting all the U's and the M's and the J's in with the symbol feature. So it took me about 2 hours. So this is what we said about what intersectionality is. And the reason that I'm very pleased that Sebastian is here is because if I stall on this, because I'm the student and not the teacher, then help. And you can have 10 more minutes of your time because you can fill in the gaps. So we started off with, we had 6 principles of intersectionality. The first one, be consistent. Question all hierarchies, not only those that is comparatively safe or convenient for you to question. That's the first thing we said about it. Again, point 1, if you claim to stand for non-violence, make your every choice as non-violent as possible. Fairly kind of straightforward, almost like a vegan message, I suppose. Again, point 1, don't fight for someone's liberation in a way that hurts someone else. That was probably written for Peter, maybe, I don't know. Without total liberation, there can be no liberation. So everything is linked with suggestion. No one will be liberated unless everyone is liberated. All the oppressed needs to be liberated. And you can't fight for one in isolation. It doesn't make sense. And what's wrong about that is if you fight for one in a way that adds to the oppression of another, then that's wrong. That is yourself taking part in rights violations. That's just the wrong thing to do. We can't put together a racist campaign and call it animal rights. You can't put together a sexist campaign and call it animal rights. It just cannot be done. It doesn't make any conceptual sense whatsoever. Point 2, be a respectful ally. Don't always speak for other people. That probably could actually just, we could miss out the always there probably. Create a space where they can speak for themselves and be heard. We had a problem with this in Dublin because we had a lot of material about animal rights, about veganism, about feminism. We didn't have much anti-racist stuff because we didn't have any black members and we didn't have any other people of color. And it was a problem then because we didn't want to speak for them, and yet there was nobody, as it were, within the group to speak for themselves. So we ended up kind of, as it were, short of materials in that sense. So that's an interesting one about, as it were, if someone is absent, a group is absent, to what extent can you include them in your intersectionality claims, when there's no one of that group to represent themselves? That's an interesting one, I think, maybe. Again, be a respectful ally. Don't always know best. Now, there'll be a few smiles in the group, probably from this direction, because this looks as like it was written for Gary Francione, but it probably wasn't. Don't always know best. Learn to listen. This is a very big lesson, as Tim said, about intersectionality. I, as a white, black, heterosexual guy, need to know when to shut the fuck up and listen. And I think that's in fact, I said that in Brighton at the panel. I think that's one of the things that intersectionality says to us, is learn when just to shut up and listen to others and take on board, and don't make it one-way traffic all the time. It's supposed to be an exchange. We need to exchange views with other people. Have empathy for the struggles of your comrades. Show solidarity with everyone who is oppressed. Show solidarity in your daily choices. Let no violent action or word go unchallenged. Now, this taps into what Tim said about ableist thing. Ableist language is very difficult. We've struggled for years and years and years to stop people, especially animal advocates, calling other animals it, right? It's still difficult, and, if you get a little bit kind of going, you can fall into it yourself. But we've tried, because we know that language is important. We're a social justice movement. One aspect of all social justice movement is linguistic in character. Go back to feminism. The idea that when they transformed the idea of history into his story, that's a political thing, to change the language in that way, right? We do that. David Nibert doesn't say domesticate, he says domesticrate, okay? So he uses different language. Joan Denea had an entire kind of new dictionary. My favorite was, she wanted to call fish tanks and aquariums aqua prisons, right? I reviewed her book in 2001 for a guy who is unfortunately dead now, Neil Lee, and he had a magazine called Arc News. I reviewed that book years ago, and I said I don't see this language taking on in the movement because we're not sophisticated enough to do it. Our language is still a little bit loose on that, and often we find ourselves calling other animals it. But, she wanted to call farmers enslavers, this kind of thing. You wouldn't say fur, you say pelt. She had an entire dictionary. I think it might still be online, Joan Denea. She'd also got an audio thing online. If you look for that, that's really kind of good. Okay, as Marcuse said, now we got a lot of stuff because I used to teach critical theory, so I got a lot of stuff from a neo-Marxist called Herbert Marcuse. And, he was very critical of capitalism, obviously, but he was also very critical of Marx. And so he was a neo-Marxist. But he did say this: solidarity is the driving power of liberation. We need solidarity. One video I always recommend is called Steve Best, Total Liberation. And it makes a heck of a lot of sense. You watch that. It was about 2013, and it took place in Luxembourg. It was the keynote speech at the end of a conference. Steve Best, Total Liberation, and he says we're not big enough on our own. We've got to change things, and we need to forge alliances. Now, he makes the claim. He says whether we like it or not, we're a left-wing movement. So when he says alliance politics, he means with other left groups. Now, I know that's a controversial thing to say within the animal rights movement, you know, but he says, well, look at our values, things like democracy, rights, you know, kind of sharing, this kind of thing. These are not right-wing values, you know, which is based on things like country and military and all that kind of stuff. You know, watch the thing. It's a good one. Steve Best, Total Liberation. Point 4, thinking critically about our privilege. Again, Tim talked about this because that's one of the main things, again, about intersectionality. It gets us to focus on ourselves. Now, some vegans don't like intersectionality. Why? Because they like to be the cowboy with the white hat, and everybody else is the baddie, right? And they are the goodies, you know? And this is why people say, I'm vegan, I'm cruelty-free. Well, that's a debatable idea, but, you know, I know what they're getting at. But, you know, as Andrew Lindsay said, there's no pure land. We all cause harm. You know, just by living, we all cause harm. There was a debate years ago, which none of you will have taken part in, which is about kind of vegan suicide. You know, should vegans commit suicide because that's the only real way of not causing harm? Yes. So, think critically about your privilege. Are you white, male, heterosexual, financially secure, human? Well, I'm all of those except for financially secure, which is true. Unemployed at the moment. So, if so, think about the privilege you enjoy in a hierarchical society as a result of these arbitrary characteristics. So again, this focus on privilege, very important within intersectionality. Think about the violence and exploitation you do not have to experience or be constantly afraid of due to your privileges. You know, when you're privileged, it means things in that sense. In your everyday life, there's some things you just don't have to be worried about. You know, you don't have to think about doing certain things, going certain places, etc., etc. We know what's being said there. 5, be aware of all forms of violence. We all help to create the oppressive system in which we exist. This is again what Tim was saying when he was saying that racism and sexism is institutionalized. It's not necessarily embedded in individuals. Obviously, there are sexist and racist individuals, but in terms of the institution, it's embedded within the structure of society. It's a structural problem within sociology. You know, we talk about, the police came out, didn't they, a couple of decades ago now, admitted that they were institutionally racist. Okay, you know, when I used to explain institutionalization to my kind of core sociology thing, I used to give them an example and say, well, okay, imagine a kid, they go to their parents and they go, I fancy a bike. Should I steal one or should I save up and buy one? And the parent is supposed to say, you should save up, right? And then the kid thinks, I didn't like that answer, I'll have a second opinion. Goes to their teacher, right, and says to teacher, I quite fancy a bike. Should I steal one or should I save up? Oh, you should save up. And then they go and see a police officer about it. And that person is employed to say, you should save up, and if you don't, you're going to be in trouble. And the point of that little silly story is that it shows that the same value is in the institutions of society throughout. It's replicated within the different institutions. So we've got family, education, law enforcement with the same value embedded within it. You know, if we talk about things that are institutionally racist and everything, it's embedded into the society. Okay, now this is where we might get, again, this is like a critique of a few things in a way. Steve Best in that video talks about vegan porn, about, you know, about the cupcakes and all this kind of stuff. Consumption of consumer goods, animal products, cash crops, products of sweatshops and child labor is violence. Now, this is something that the vegan movement needs to sharpen itself up on. It's not enough just to make sure that things are 100% animal product free. A lot of the chocolate that people buy is the product of child labor. You know, there are a lot of trafficked people in the world. You know, it's not just sexual exploitation, but there's a lot of that, but there's a lot of bonded labor as well. Sweatshops are still a problem. And it's not just in kind of distant places. There's sweatshops in England. You know, this is, you know, an issue. It's something that we as vegans need to really sharpen up on, because we don't want to buy anything and support anything that creates oppression to anyone at all. So we need to find out about our products more than just, does that contain X, Y, or Z? Okay, we need to do a bit more than that. Okay, sexist jokes are violence. Ableist and racist attitudes are violence. Be aware of the violence in the language you use, the products you buy, your assumptions about others, your relationships with them. And I think we moved on to the last one. 6, recognizing that justice is limitless, and you'll be pleased to know that it ends on an upbeat, really. Justice does not end or even really begin with putting money in a collection box, signing a petition, or attending one protest. We kind of need to be a bit more than that. Justice begins in your home as well as in the streets, in your town as well as faraway war zones. The expansive vision of peace that is veganism is limitless. It begins with you. So that's what I want to end with, really, because I think that if we have a proper understanding of the origins of veganism, we would describe it now as intersectional in its scope and attitudes. We are talking about 1944, while the Second World War was still raging, when this social movement, the Vegan Society, the vegan social movement, was started by Donald Watson and co. Okay, they were conscientious objectors within the war. They saw veganism as part of the peace movement. They saw veganism as part of the moral evolution of humanity. They saw, well, Watson described veganism as the greatest cause on earth. And I think he meant that veganism was an overarching concept that could be used in order to look at oppression. I think it was a very intersectional view. Now, admittedly, Watson looked like a gardener, and he spoke like a polite English gentleman, but he's very radical if you look at what they did. And it's also true that they ended up talking about a lot in the early years about health. That was because everyone told them in the 1940s, I mean, I went vegan in the 1970s, but in the 1940s, everybody told them they were going to die. They were literally going to die. Okay? Doctors told them that, all their friends told them that. So they had to talk about health for a long time. But it was always about more than that. It was never about a diet. It was never about health. And it was never about what a lot of vegans seem to want to reduce veganism to, and that's our relations with other animals. It was never only about that. It was always more. It was about our relationships with each other as humans and with the planet and the environment and everything else. It was always about the focus, yes, as being about our relationships with other sentient beings. But that's not the end of all. So if you look at the definition of veganism, which a lot of people bring up when you talk about this, well, veganism says this as a definition. Yes, that's true. But Leslie Cross, and another... Sorry about that. I think I spat on you. Leslie Cross, another one of the originators of the social movement, said that the definition doesn't capture everything. It's just a kind of starting point. So never just think that those words are it. Especially not the 1979 Vegan Society thing. You know, the one about practical and possible and this kind of stuff, which a lot of people say was Donald Watson's phrase. It wasn't. You know, Watson actually didn't define veganism too well. You know, he was kind of almost like too busy living it. Cross argued about that, and in the 50s, and so eventually we ended up with a definition. And then the Vegan Society firmed it up in their terms by the end of the 1970s. But already by then there was this kind of push really to kind of limit it a little bit. So think critically about the definition that you know about veganism. I think. Oh yeah, now that's just another leaflet that we've got, but I'm out of time anyway, so it's a good time to finish. Thanks very much.